Okay, thank you. Let's try it again.
That's like a Monday morning hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Dr. Gorka, thank you. Welcome back to the Washington Center. This guy is a one-person machine, 200 radio stations across the country, former advisor to Donald Trump, senior advisor in the 2020 and the 2016 campaign, author of a number of books. We featured him 2 weeks ago on C-SPAN 2's In Depth for 2 hours, so you can check it out online. And I want to welcome you back to the Washington Center.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. And the only reason I'm so impressive is because I know people like Steve.
So we're going to talk about Road to 2020, but I want to go back to 2016. When we saw Donald Trump come down that escalator in 2015, he was mocked, even among the Republican establishment. Nobody thought he could even get through Iowa and New Hampshire. He gets the nomination, and then he defeats Hillary Clinton, not through the popular vote, but through the Electoral College. What did the media miss in 2016? There wasn't a single major editorial board that endorsed Donald Trump, and yet he won with 307 electoral votes. So what happened?
So that is a very complicated question. Let me talk about the key aspects of it, but start with just a reminder. There's 2 tweets that I will never delete from my phone. They come from a week before the 2016 election and the night of the election. And one is from the New York Times, the other one is from the Huffington Post. The New York Times, before the election, said Hillary Clinton has a 92% chance of winning. On the day of the election, the Huffington Post says she has a 96% chance of winning, and I think Donald Trump had a 1.8. Not 1.7, not 1.9, but 1.8% chance of winning. Those are tweets I will never delete. Why? Because it demonstrates just how utterly wrong the quote-unquote elite can be. This is the grey lady. This is the newspaper of record, and HuffPo, the edgy, trendy, whatever you want to call it, pile of garbage as far as I'm concerned, that gets it so utterly, completely wrong. Why? I'll give you my view of why they got it so wrong. Donald Trump, it bears remembering, is the first president in the history of our republic since the Revolutionary War that America chose who wasn't part of the swamp. From George Washington to Barack Obama, all 44 presidents were either former congressmen, senators, governors, or retired generals. Every single one. In 2016, 63 million Americans chose a man who'd never served in public office before, and a man who stunningly became president of the first time he ran for that office. Now, how could everything change so very, very much? I'll give you the answer through the prism of a book that inspired me greatly to write my last book, The War for America's Soul, my newest book. I don't read autobiographies as a rule. I have no time for these massive 700 pages, and I couldn't care less what Eisenhower had for breakfast on February the 12th, 1940. I just couldn't care less, with 2 exceptions. And these 2 books are life-changing. In the last 20 years, these are 2 of the most important books I've read. The first one I can discuss later, and that's Andrew Breitbart's Righteous Indignation. Andrew Breitbart's autobiography, from his journey from being a leftist, Democrat, pot-smoking, alcoholic student at Tulane, to becoming the most influential conservative thinker and writer in the new media sphere.
We should point out Breitbart.
And the founder of Breitbart.com, sorry, and of course, the founder of Breitbart.com. His book explains to you how much politics and culture have changed in the last 30 years, and gives us this incredible phrase that is so popular today that most people don't understand. Politics is downstream from culture. That's Andrew Breitbart, and that is a monumentally important statement that explains not only Trump, but also Obama and the phenomena of celebrity politicians. I can talk about that later, but please read it, especially chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a life-changing piece of writing. The other book, and I have to say, I hope I won't go up in smoke, but I owe my old boss this. He pointed it out to me, Steve Bannon. I was a strategist to the president. Steve Bannon was chief strategist to the president. And Steve one day said to me, you've got to read this book, Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, another autobiography. And okay. I sat down, I read it in one Thanksgiving weekend. It was so compelling. And this is not a guy who likes Trump. J.D. Vance, who's now an international phenomenon, is no Trump supporter, at least not when he wrote the book. He might be changing now given the grief he's been given. But J.D. Vance's book is incredible. Why? This is a young man who grew up as part of a famous hillbilly clan that moved from the hills of Tennessee to the Midwest. And his family's story is the story of middle America, of working class, salt of the earth America in the 20th century. And it's a story of unflappable, determined individuals who end up being destroyed by the political elite, that create wealth for themselves, stability, become part of the manufacturing base of America. And then, because of the politics of the last 30 years, on both left and right, this is not a partisan thing, this is GOP and Democrats together, are destroyed, to the point at which the town he grew up in becomes a kind of deadwood town full of opioid abuse, unemployment, and just despair. He escapes himself. He becomes a Marine, a success, and breaks out. But Hillbilly Elegy, I use that in my new book to take a bird's eye perspective that in this country, sadly the greatest nation on God's earth, we had a kind of consensus since about the late 80s, early 90s, on left and right, that America's bright days are over, that other countries are going to take us over economically, politically, the rising of the BRICS, the Brazil, the Russia, the India, the Chinas, and the future is managed decline. This idea that we're never going to be great again, and the political elite's job is just to kind of guide us on that glide path to mediocrity and failure. And along comes a man who's incredibly successful in business. I mean, think about it. There's no market tougher than New York real estate. And he looks at this political swamp and he says, hey, that's just wrong. I love this country. This country is great, and it can be great again. And I'm going to fix the swamp. I'm going to drain the swamp. So I think, to simplify down as much as I can, Steve, there was this across-the-aisle group thing that said America's days are over, and that's why they couldn't believe that a non-politician businessman could defeat not only 16 establishment GOP candidates, but also a woman who was, her last name is part of that quote-unquote elite.
But as you well know, and I'm not telling you anything that you haven't heard, he is a very divisive person. His tweets can be very bombastic. We are a divided country, and typically presidents try to unite the country, and Donald Trump has not done that. Now, I've heard the argument that if you hit him, he's going to punch back harder. But do you worry that that's fraying the very fabric of our country by the tone that he and others are saying? And it's on both sides of the aisle, but he is still the president.
So this whole thing about the tweets is, I do a lot of public speaking. I have my daily radio show, America First, where I travel the country and I speak to conservative audiences. If I get one more conservative say, hey, I like the president, my 401k is great, but I wish he'd tweet less, I get really pissed. Really pissed.
Because?
Because I say, dude, really? Tweets? Tweets? Have you looked at the Supreme Court? What happened to ISIS? What happened to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? What happened to unemployment in America for Hispanics and blacks? What's happened to the size of the U.S. economy, which since he was inaugurated has increased by $11 trillion? The size of the economy. We were told those jobs are never coming back. Remember, Obama lectured us like a school mom. You're going to need a magic wand to bring those jobs back. Well, I guess President Trump went not only to the best business school in America, to Wharton. I guess he got a diploma from Hogwarts, because he got that magic wand. So the idea that, I'll illustrate it like this. My buddy at Salem is Larry Elder, great African-American radio show host. And he tells this story I steal from him all the time. He says, two pro golf players are sitting watching a golfer tee off. And then one of them says, look at that man's style. Look at the way he's positioned his feet. Look at the way he's holding the club. And then the movement of his hips, wow. And the other golfer goes, the other pro goes, who cares? Where's the ball landing? Forget about the style. It's not about style. Yes, Barack Obama could read a teleprompter, could read a speech. Who cares if he was smooth? By the end of his reign in the White House, one metric, just one metric, forget about the economy. The world, by the end of Obama's 8 years, the world had 65 million refugees. That is a historic world record. We had less refugees globally in 1945 after 6 years of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust. It's not about style, it's about getting stuff done. And the idea that he's the divisive one that started it, really? Really? Look at what's going on right now in the last 4 days. We have Democrat potential presidential candidates like Bernie Sanders. We have Chris Matthews, host of a national TV show, saying the President of the United States murdered a foreign government official. That Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force's funeral, was like Princess Diana's death and Elvis's combined. So, what? This is a man with the blood of 603 American servicemen on his hands. The man who masterminded the siege of our embassy 18 days ago. This is the man who was planning to kill hundreds of Americans in the coming weeks, plus untold numbers of our Muslim Arab allies. Who's being divisive? Really? The insanity of the current political situation. Did anybody criticize Obama for killing Osama? Of course not. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. I was cheering. I couldn't stand what Obama stood for. But taking out the man responsible for 9/11, I don't care who you vote for. I don't care where you were born, your skin color, your sexual preference. If you're not cheering for that, you need to look in the mirror, because you have a problem with your soul. But they're doing it right now. We took out the most dangerous terrorist in the world, and they're calling the president a murderer. I think it's more than his tweets are the problem.
But, with all due respect, part of the problem, don't you think, Sebastian, is the shifting story. Why did he do it? Was it an imminent threat? We heard from the Defense Secretary that it was not. Why not just say, we planned this for months, we had the opportunity, we took him out? Why the shifting story?
Because at the end of the day, Steve, it doesn't matter. It's totally irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant whether he's going to attack us Tuesday or 3 years from now. The unclassified reports state he was behind the death of 603 U.S. servicemen. Thousands of mutilated, double, triple, quadruple amputees. I couldn't care. I mean, I spoke to my buddies in the administration the day after the hit, after the Hellfire strike, and they said the president had been presented with, quote, exquisite intelligence that attacks were being planned by this man, and that's why he took him out. But even if he wasn't, I mean, this whole idea that we weren't convinced by the briefing given to us on Capitol Hill. Really? How about the last 40 years? Is the last 40 years of what Iran's done to us not justified? I'll give you one metric. Forget about future imminent attacks. In the Beirut bombing attack of our Marine barracks, 241 Americans, Marines, were murdered by Hezbollah, which was being run and funded and trained by Iran. That one attack, was the greatest loss of Marine Corps life since Iwo Jima. From that day onwards, if you're walking around the planet as commander of the IRGC Quds Force, you should have crosshairs on your skull, and we get to take you out whenever we want. So this is dancing on the head of a pin. How many angels can you fit? I couldn't care less. This is the most murderous sponsor of international terrorism in the world today, and everyone who has decency in their gene code must welcome the death of mass murderers like Qasem Soleimani.
Let me ask you about Donald Trump, the person, because even his fiercest critics often come away and say, he was so nice, he was so polite, he's such a good host. You worked with him, you've been around him. What is he like off the stage?
This is what everybody wants to know. What's he really like? And here's the bad news. There's no surprises. If you've been alive and had a pulse for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, opened a newspaper, switched on a TV show, what you see is what you get. I worked for him as his advisor when he was candidate Trump, and I worked as his strategist in the White House. If it was just the two of us behind closed doors in the Oval Office, it was exactly the same, which is very unusual, in D.C. D.C. is the Janus-faced, city of smoke and mirrors. Most people in the political domain, and the media domain as well, have a public persona. They get their teeth whitened, they get their hair fixed, and they're all smiley. And then behind closed doors, there's a different persona. There's the real person. Not with Donald Trump. Whether it's an episode of The Apprentice or negotiating the I'll withdraw from the JCPOA Obama-Iran deal in the White House, it's the same Donald Trump. So what's he like? He is, above all, a patriot who is pragmatic. And one of the best descriptions, and apologies for using it again, I think I used it last year. My good friend is Monica Crowley. Monica Crowley, I think, is now press secretary for Treasury. She's just been newly appointed. She spoke at an event we were at together the weekend after the 2016 election. Excuse me. And she nailed it. She said, everybody who misunderstood candidate Trump misunderstood him primarily for one reason. They thought he was an ideological candidate. They tried to put him into a taxonomy, a category, a box. He's neoliberal, conservative, isolationist, interventionist, whatever, using the garbage verbiage of this city. She said, he wasn't an ideological candidate. He was an attitudinal one. And she's absolutely right. There's no political taxonomy Donald Trump fits into. Remember, this is a man who, during the campaign at one of his events, strutted around the stage waving a gay pride flag. It's not exactly classic GOP campaign methodology. But that's him. This is a man who doesn't follow ideological blinkers. Why? Because he's not a politician. He didn't have to. He's a pragmatist. His attitudinal character is what we voted for. What's the attitude? America's back. I love America. We're going to fix it. And it's also not about isolationism. This is what conservatives misunderstand as well. They try to put him into a Rand Paul isolationist or a neoconservative interventionist box. No, absolutely not. When I was in the White House, I used the Marine Corps motto to describe really what Donald Trump as president represents internationally. It's maybe the Marine Corps, but it's perfect for what he believes. No better friend, no worse enemy. If you share our values, I don't care whether you're Israel, Poland, or Vanuatu, we're shoulder to shoulder with you. If you don't, and if you threaten us, get ready.
But let me put on the table one issue that he has not kept his promise on, and that is to balance the budget. Later this week, they're going to hear about the deficit and the debt now in excess of $23 trillion, on pace to even far exceed what Barack Obama did. He did promise to bring spending down. He has not done that. Why?
Look, I've very rarely seen President Trump angry. This is one of the few issues. And it has really a lot to do with our founding fathers. We, thankfully, in our republic have separation of powers, we have checks and balances, and the power of the purse doesn't reside in the Senate, doesn't reside in the White House, the power of the purse and the budget resides in the House. So he's certainly hostage to that inbuilt dynamic in the United States.
But he had the House and the Senate in the first 2 years.
And that's why he's so angry at Paul Ryan. He's still fuming to this day at Paul Ryan, and he feels underserved by those today who are continuing to promote this behaving like drunken sailors. We have serious threats to this country, China being the primary one, but if you want to talk about domestic threats, it's the support of socialism amongst millennials, and secondly, it's what's happening on Capitol Hill. I mean, we are spending our great-grandchildren's futures as if we're totally drunken sailors who just got a paycheck. So I'm not making excuses for him, but at the end of the day, he may be the most powerful man in the world, but he's still only one man and he doesn't control the spending. But this is something that I can assure you, this and the Russia hoax are the two things that make him most angry as president.
You are not from this country, spoiler alert, you can tell by the accent. What is the Dr. Gorka story? How did you end up at the White House?
Okay, so yes, I am a legal immigrant to the United States. My parents escaped communist Hungary in the revolution of 1956. My father, at the age of 20, was an anti-communist secret Christian students organization who was arrested and betrayed by one of the greatest traitors to the West in Cold War history, a man called Kim Philby. My father was arrested at the age of 20 as a student, tortured, and given a life sentence in a communist prison. In 1956, he was liberated by a group of revolutionary students who captured a Soviet tank, bust down the front gate of the prison, and liberated the political prisoners of conscience like my father. He escaped to the West with the 17-year-old daughter of a fellow prison mate, literally across a minefield into Austria as refugees. And they made it out to the UK, where they were married, and that's my mother and father. I was born and raised in the UK, grew up under Margaret Thatcher, got my first degree in London, and then after the wall fell, because I spoke Hungarian, several other languages, and had served in the British Military Intelligence Reserves, was offered a job in the first freely elected government of newly democratic Hungary. So I moved to Hungary after the fall, became a government official in the first conservative government there, spent 15 years in Hungary, and then 9/11 hits. I'd worked on counterterrorism issues, had been invited by a Marine Corps colonel, a legend called Nick Pratt, to teach on a counterterrorism course after 9/11, to build an international coalition of like-minded nations, including Muslim nations, to help defeat Al-Qaeda. Taught on that program for 4 years, and then my American wife and I decided in 2008 to move to America, thinking we'd leave socialism behind. It's a joke. The socialism followed us in 2008, and a certain person was elected President of the United States. I got a job teaching counterterrorism and irregular warfare in the Defense Department, spent 5 years at National Defense University, not far from here, teaching the master's program for the Pentagon, and then transitioned to a privately funded position at the Marine Corps University in Quantico, loved working with the Marines. And then I got a phone call summer of 2015, as I'm in Quantico, from somebody called Corey Lewandowski, who I didn't know from a hole in the ground, who said, "I'm Mr. Trump's campaign manager, and he's preparing for a fall GOP debate on national security, and he wants somebody to advise him. Would you be free to meet with him?" I said, "Sure." So I flew to New York, went to Trump Tower, sat down with the future president in his office with 3 of us and Corey, had this incredible blue sky discussion on national security issues, everything from the Civil War to ISIS and nuclear weapons. And then halfway through the conversation, he did a classic Trump. He stopped the conversation dead, looked to Corey and said, "I like this guy, let's hire him." So I became candidate Trump's advisor on national security issues, started working closer and closer with General Flynn, who became part of the transition team for candidate Trump. And then eventually 12 o'clock on January 20th, 2017, I assumed the position of Deputy Assistant to the President for Strategy in the White House.
So we're going to do something a little different. I want to get all your questions. I'm going to ask some of the faculty members who have not asked a question this week. So I'm going to come all the way back here to Central Michigan University. Come on up, sir. Go ahead with a question or a comment.
You caught me off guard. But I was...
I may have caught you off guard, but that is a very dapper tie. I must say. First of all, introduce yourself to Dr. Gorka.
I'm David Rutledge. I teach political science at Central Michigan University and a former legislator. And in my own line, I've been trying to reconcile this idea of no experience politically in government with President Trump and how he moves and makes decisions. So my question to you would be, in the decision-making process, is he concerned at all about unity at all, or bringing some kind of civil discord, civilness to the discussion? And the reason I ask the question is because there is research to show that people generally take on the persona of their political leaders. They start to act like them, or they feel like they have permission to act like them.
Thank you for the question. Dr. Gorka?
Yeah, there's a very clear theme or an inference in that question that he's not about civil discourse. Let me deal with that first. Who's for civil discourse in this country right now? Let's just look at the last 3.5 years. Who's really the problem when it comes to civil discourse? Is it a guy who, tweets like he's from Queens? Or is it the media? My parents were children under Nazi occupation of Hungary, suffered under a fascist regime. My father, as a child, had to escort his fellow Jewish schoolmates to school every day who were forced to wear the yellow Star of David. He was a Catholic, but his friends were Jewish, and he'd escort them, hold them by the hand to a Roman Catholic school to stop the occupational German forces from spitting on his friends and abusing them. And then he grows up and is arrested and tortured by communist secret police officers who, in many cases, this is what some people forget, those communist secret police officers, a few months earlier, had been members of the Arrow Cross fascist regime. They just changed their uniforms. This is a phenomenon in Central Europe, One dictatorship, another dictatorship, I just changed my uniform. That's my family history. So when I become the face of the Trump administration in the first weekend, when I am thrown out there to explain and defend the president's travel ban, which was based upon an Obama White House analysis of threats from 7 nations that were mostly Muslim. As soon as I become the proxy for the president, I thought I'd seen everything. I'm a pretty hard-bitten guy, pretty cynical. Lived here for a decade in the swamp. But I wasn't ready for what happened to me and my family. People who called themselves journalists to this very day, journalists, called me a Nazi, called me a fascist. They attacked my wife as a nationalist and a racist. They attacked the reputation of my dead mother. And then a journalist wrote an article about my 18-year-old high school-age son using the word traitor in the headline. So don't talk to me about divisive leadership styles in the White House. We have one political party that's normalized the dehumanization of their opponents. When you think it's okay to attack a 10-year-old boy simply because he is President Trump's son, you have lost the right to call yourself a journalist. When you spin for 3 years an outrageous conspiracy theory of Russia collusion, you are the enemy of the American people. When you realize you have no evidence, Robert Mueller says there was no collusion, and you refuse to apologize. So divisiveness cannot be laid at the door of the president because he hasn't treated anyone as badly as the press has treated him. Now, when it comes to your first half of your question on leadership style and how it works, his goal isn't inclusivity. His goal isn't kumbaya. This guy's a billionaire who's been successful for 50 years in real estate. So what do you think his goal is? We have a problem. Let's fix it. I saw this every single day. My remit may have been national security, but I was an observer on the National Economic Council. I watched lots of other things in the White House. And it was all about one thing. Can you bring results to the table? The immigration system is bust. Can you fix it? Our economy is hemorrhaging. Can you fix it? We don't have enough skilled labor across the nation. Can you fix it? All he cares about is making it better for all Americans. So if there's one guiding theme to his management style, it's focus on the results. That's really who he is. Great question.
One more faculty question and then student questions. And Nancy, you are up next. 25 years here at the Washington Center. Go ahead. Introduce yourself if you would.
I'm Nancy Cade. I teach at the University of Pikeville in the heart of Appalachia. Of all the things that have transpired in the Trump administration, what do you consider to be his greatest disappointment? The one thing that he could not accomplish, the one thing that he would focus on in the next 4 years, and how might he change his focus?
Great question. For my last book, The War for America's Soul, we went back to the Oval Office last year, and I sat down with the president and I gave an interview. He gave an interview on his first 3 years. His greatest mistake, and I wasn't expecting this answer. I asked him, "What's your greatest mistake?" And he said, "You shouldn't quote this. We're off the record now." And then he changed his mind. He said, "Yeah, you can put it in."
Sounds so much fun.
Yeah.
I got just one quick aside. We're at a dinner, or at luncheon with Trump before the State of the Union. The whole thing is off the record. He had some great stuff. In the middle of the lunch, he goes, "Oh, what the hell? It's all on the record." And his press secretary's like, "No!"
He's not a politician. He said, "My biggest mistake was appointing Jeff Sessions Attorney General." And you have to agree. Super nice guy, lovely guy, totally out of his depth. And when he took the Kool-Aid of the deep state advisors saying, "Oh, you forgot the ambassador was at that event that you were at and you didn't tell Congress. You must recuse yourself from Russian collusion investigations." Basically, we had no attorney general for 3 years. I mean, until Bill Barr, we were AWOL, and DOJ was being run by Obama holdovers. So he said AG Sessions' biggest mistake. If I can extrapolate or add to that what else I think he would say and what my biggest criticism is, number one, the wall. I mean, he knows his biggest vulnerability is he's got to show that the wall is being built. We've had an amazing success last week. $3.6 billion has been released by the courts. We can use DoD funding to build the wall. Allegedly, there's another $3-4 billion coming. So when you're elected on fixing the economy, defeating ISIS, and building the wall, those have very clear metrics. And building the wall, it's got to be visible, it's got to be seen. For me, the biggest problem with the Trump administration, God willing, if we win in 293 days, our biggest vulnerability, and I'll be really candid here, personnel. We have no bench. The GOP, I said this when I was in the White House, I said it since I left the White House, Donald Jonathan Trump won despite the GOP, not because of the GOP. A large chunk of the GOP hates him and thinks he's an anomaly and thinks once he is not re-elected, they can get back to business and the swamp can scratch each other's backs. When we came into the White House, there were about 20 of us, and I mean 20 of us, to run 2 million people in federal government who were in senior positions, understood the president, understood what making America great again really means, and were loyal to his vision and the desire, the mandate of 63 million people. This is a massive, massive undertaking. We have to build that bench. I'll end on this one example. I told Mike Flynn in transition, I worked very closely with General Flynn, we had great plans for what we were going to do when we came in. And we realized that, for example, the National Security Council under Obama it was like Topsy, it was like a cancer. It had grown to 420 people. In the White House, 420 people, just in the NSC. And I said to Mike, you know, this is supposed to be the strategic level of government. It's not supposed to be a replication of the whole administration. Slash and burn. Get rid of 90% of it. And we'll struggle, but we'll bring loyal people in from the campaign, and they won't know the difference between Iran and Iraq for 6 months, but I'll train them up, and everybody will be fine by the end of it. And you won't be beholden to people who hate you, because I saw people who hated the president in the highest positions of federal government, which is wrong. I was told by a senior FBI executive that the Hoover Building's 7th floor looks at the White House under Trump as the enemy. Can you imagine if a Republican FBI agent had said that about Obama, that we look at Obama as the enemy and you work for him? So I told the guys, get rid of them all and we'll fix it. And they didn't. What happened? Flynn was framed, and on and on and on. So it's personnel. Look, it's an old cliche, but cliches are often true. Personnel is policy. Personnel is policy.
So I'm going to take this 2 ways, and then I'll get you for a question. You have a question right in front? So I'll come to you first. In a sentence, Donald Trump will win in 2020 because?
I don't do predictions. Because nobody's ever held to predictions.
But the issues, I mean, he's going to win because I'm also asking.
Look, I'll tell. If nothing exogenous happens in the next 9 months, if everything keeps ticking the way it's ticking, number one, the people arrayed against him don't have a chance. I mean, I was asked in a recent debate, so who's going to get the nomination for the Democrats of all the people running? And I said, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Forget about tweets, forget about style and language. Look at empirically measurable things. The Caliphate of ISIS is gone. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. Qasem Soleimani is dead. NATO is finally paying its dues to defend itself and our common interests. We have the lowest unemployment since 1969. We have the lowest unemployment for black Americans and Hispanics since record-keeping began. And each of the markets, the stock markets, has increased since the election by between 20 and 40% of gross value. If somebody told you, invest in my product and I'll give you 20% returns, you should call the police. Immediately call the police, right? Because that's a flim-flam artist. Donald Trump has done it. And not only that, forget about the stock market, because people say, oh, that's for the rich people. No. If you have a 401k, if you've got a retirement plan, stock market matters to you. Just the economic figures. As I said before, since we've unleashed the American economy, we came in, the president said, I'm not signing an executive order unless 2 prior orders are rescinded. I want to slash and burn. 2 to 1. And we thought, wow, that's great. By the 9th month of the administration, you know what that figure was? 22 to 1. We had slashed 22 standing executive orders for every new one the president signed, which means what? You get federal government off the back of small businesses. You get Uncle Sam off the back of the hard-working American, which means what? We didn't create jobs in the White House. We have created the conditions to allow Americans to create jobs. And now we have added $11 trillion to the size of the economy. This is one of the biggest, last point, it's one of the biggest philosophical issues between left and right, between Democrats and Republicans, between socialists and those that believe in democracy. Socialism on the left would have you believe that an economic system is closed, that you must redistribute wealth within a closed system. You've got to create social equity. as a conservative and as somebody who lives in the real world, if you look at the last 100, 200 years, you know wealth is not static. Wealth is not closed. It's not the inside of a table tennis ball. Economies expand. Therefore, you don't have to take from one to give to the other. You make a bigger pie so everybody can get more. And what Donald Trump's policies have done have increased the size of the pie by $11 trillion, which by itself is remarkable. So everything else stays the same. I think the question answers itself.
And conversely, he will lose because what's the biggest concern, what's the biggest worry that would cause his defeat? First time, we re-elected 4 of our last 5 presidents to a second term.
The biggest worry I have, and it's as this child of people who escaped communism, it's one that really disturbs me every single day. There's an amazing organization called the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation that keeps alive the truth of the horrors of communism and the stories of those who escaped and were persecuted under communism. And every year in November they do a big poll with YouGov, a very serious poll. And the last poll a few months ago found that 72% of American millennials, 72%, would prefer to live in a socialist or communist America. And that just chills me to the core. Because the ideology of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels took the lives of at least 100 million human beings in the 20th century. Communism was tried in 40 different countries, 40. And in none of them did it succeed, but it led to death camps, labor camps, and the Gulag. That's what worries me, that narrative that socialism is cool because Bernie says so will somehow really gain even more traction.
So let me get to questions. First up, what's your name? Where are you from?
My name's Riley Mullins. I'm from the University of Blackpool. There's been a lot of turnover in the White House. What can explain this in detail, I guess?
The fact is turnover is standard. In the 9th month of the first Clinton administration, the White House collapsed and Bill Clinton had to rebuild it. So it may sound a bit weird coming from a normal part of America, unlike the swamp. I lasted 7 months in the White House. It's pretty good. You know, a long career. My wife just finished 3 years in the administration. 3 years is way beyond average as a political appointee. It's the way it works. It's churning. It's not unusual at all. Now, I'm not saying that Scaramucci's 10 days is normal either.
No, he says 11, just to be fair.
Yeah, I know, but he's wrong.
Quite great.
All right, my name is Jovan from Quinnipiac University, and it seems that you are for taking a direct approach to end potential threats to American lives. Well, just considering your position on, the terror organizations and taking out the Iranian general. According to Homeland Security in 2009, they insisted that self-radicalized and small factions of white supremacy groups were the most dangerous domestic terrorist threat. Considering we have seen a number of mass shootings committed by white supremacists, including the El Paso shooting, do you believe direct action should be taken to silence white supremacists, just as we silence other foreign terrorists? And how may that look when the First Amendment protects free speech for domestic terrorists, but not for foreign terrorists?
There's a lot there.
So I'm not sure the DHS stat you quote. There is no equivalent white supremacist attack which is on the scale of 9/11 or San Bernardino. It just doesn't exist. Global jihadism remains the priority threat to the United States because it is globally organized. One shooter, 2 shooters at a Walmart or elsewhere is not a global conspiracy like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. When it comes to dealing with white supremacy, there's a reason the First Amendment is the First Amendment. I got into a real argument on Twitter with one of the most heinous white nationalist Holocaust deniers, a guy called Nick Fuentes. And I got a lot of heat because my conservative pals said, hey, Gorka's not a conservative, he wants to ban Nick Fuentes from Twitter. No, I don't. I was asking Jack Dorsey, why does a white supremacist, anti-Semite Holocaust denier like Nick Fuentes have a blue verified check mark Excuse me? I believe in freedom of speech, but blue verified check marks are for public figures that are, correspondents like Steve Scully or, government officials. That's wrong. At the end of the day, what happens if you curtail the freedom of speech of extremists? What happens? What happens if you curtail, if you minimize the freedom of speech of an extremist? Whether it's a jihadi or a white supremacist, what happens?
You tell me, you seem to know the answer.
No, I'm asking you.
Well, I'm not the one.
No, what do you think happens?
It gets worse.
Right, it gets worse. Because they don't suddenly become nice guys, right? They'll say, oh, yes, I like Jews now, I like blacks. No, they get angry and they go what? Underground. And they get more radical. How do you beat bad ideas? By debating them publicly, by showing them up for who they are. So I think freedom of speech should be used to make people like the threats you're mentioning look as heinous as they are. Demonstrate the paucity, the transparent lack of truth of their views. Great question.
Another question. Your name, ma'am?
My name is Mary Miller. I'm from Central Michigan University. And during your speech, you talked about how Trump always wants to hire people who are loyal to his vision. And you said there are about 20 people who came in or who have been there at a certain point who were loyal to that vision and were directly working with that vision. Do you believe that this could be bad or harmful to kind of the American political system? I know he's coming in as an outsider, but it's important for the American people to have trust in their government, and if we're only putting in people who have this one specific viewpoint, do you feel that could be toxic for you?
Before he answers that, why do you say that would be bad? To bring people loyal to you, to the White House? Why do you say it's bad?
Because I think it's important for people to challenge our ideas. You just talked about it's important how we have that political discourse to make sure that our ideas are being challenged and that we're thinking wholeheartedly about these different ideas. And while polarization maybe isn't the best for getting things done, it's always making sure that we're keeping all of the American people in the back of our minds when we're debating on things that are going to directly affect them.
So, what's your name?
Mary,
Mary, why should we have elections then?
I don't believe I understand your question.
So if you're not going to elect somebody with a vision that you want to shape the future of the country for 4 years, and he needs a team to execute that vision, why should we have elections? Because you can't say, I want to build the wall as president, I'm chosen by the American people to become president, and then he comes into the White House, and then he has people around him who believe we shouldn't build the wall. Then why did we have an election?
Mary, let me jump in on one other point. Loyalty versus political debate in the White House.
Oh my gosh,
Which is an
this is
important
not an administration without political debate. So let me give you an example. I think you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who understand why America chose him and wish to help him implement the vision that the American people put him in office to execute. That's what I'm talking about. Blind loyalty. I'm talking about people who understand why he was elected, and I know why he was elected.
So if you went to the president...
Let me finish this
Oh, sure.
on the JCPOA, because this is a really good example.
Okay.
One of the proudest moments for me in the White House was when we killed the Iran deal, which was a disaster. We gave $150 billion to our deadliest enemies. How did he wanted to kill this. It was one of his campaign platforms. But you know how we dealt with this issue in the White House? This is not, if you want to know how Donald Trump operates, this is how the president operates. One day he calls me and Steve Bannon into the Oval. And he said, okay, you're my tough guys. And we're in the Oval, he's sitting there, and arrayed around the front are Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, and in the back was Ryan's previous Chief of Staff. And he said, okay, this Iran deal is garbage as far as I'm concerned, but I need you to convince me. You want it, Steve Mnuchin. H.R. McMaster wants to keep it. Steve and Seb want to destroy it. Convince me. And what did we do? It was like a high school debate. We had to make the best arguments in front of the commander-in-chief. There was no, oh, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir. It was a robust debate on the merits, and then he decided, which as far as I'm concerned in a democracy, albeit a republic, is how it should be done. We're not talking about yes men. We're talking about people who understand why America chose Donald Trump and not Hillary Clinton.
Barry, thank you for the question. We're going to come over here. What's your name? Where do you go to school?
Hi, I'm Cecilia. I go to Suffolk University in Boston.
What's with the imbalance here? Look at this. We've got like 58 people here. Go ahead.
So people commonly talk about how Trump's rhetoric often upsets people, but like it's very obvious that Trump's rhetoric also very much excites people and inspires people. So I just wanted to gauge your opinion on how, or what you think about how Trump's rhetoric towards historically marginalized communities and how it's inspired some people to pursue the ideology of a white nationalist.
Can you give me an example?
One example would be the El Paso shooting. The shooter...
How his rhetoric is against minorities.
Or not necessarily his rhetoric, but what people would say, like his hate speech. He has pursued sort of an ideology that he dislikes or dehumanizes the Hispanic community very often, and the shooter in the El Paso shooting...
It never happened. You've got to give me an example. When did he demonize the Hispanic community? I mean, this is inflammatory language. When did Donald Trump demonize the Hispanic community en masse?
Well, he has just generalized all Hispanics as rapists.
No, he hasn't. That's fake news. No, it's not. When he's talking about MS-13, so this is why I'm so glad to get these invites to come here. This is like when people say, oh, he was on the white side of the white supremacists in Charlottesville. It's not true. Read the transcript. Watch the video. Donald Trump expressly condemned the white supremacists of Charlottesville.
Can I ask a follow-up question then?
You can, but it's got to be fact-based.
Okay, where do you think the ideology of the El Paso shooter came from? Because he quoted that he was inspired by Trump's...
What if he said he'd been inspired by rainbow pony cartoons? Would that mean that Disney is guilty?
No, I think a lot of people would question that the same way I am.
That's not how you actually deal with a guest who's lecturing, okay? That's not how you handle it, okay? You allow me to interact with the person asking the question, because this is what we don't have in the city right now, is normal dialogue. One of the recent mass shooters quoted Greta Thunberg. Is she responsible for the mass murder? Would anybody say that? Of course not. I'm not responsible if somebody quotes me out of context if they're mentally deranged. One of the mass shooters, quoted Elizabeth Warren. Is Elizabeth Warren responsible? About 4 miles from where we are, Steve Scalise was almost murdered when a .7.62 caliber bullet went through his hip, fired by James Hodgkinson at a congressional charity baseball game rehearsal. Do you know who James Hodgkinson is? Does anybody here know who James Hodgkinson is? Do you know that he was a volunteer for the Democrat Party? Do you know that when he was killed by 2 very brave Capitol Police officers, he was found to have on his body a hit list of American politicians, every single one who was a Republican? Is the Democrat Party responsible for that man's actions? Yes or no?
No, I think
Okay, then...
regardless of party.
Sorry?
I think he should be held accountable regardless of his party.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Casey Armstrong. I'm from Suffolk University. So earlier in your discussion, you mentioned Trump waving a pride flag as a symbol of him being inclusive, but yet we've seen many of his policies and comments from the administration that are inciting animosity towards the LGBTQ plus community.
Such as?
For example, trans people not being allowed to serve in the military, the scrubbing of mention of LGBTQ words and talking points on the WhiteHouse.gov website. So I was just wondering that if the administration is supposed to be unifying for all people, how are we supposed to believe in that if some of these actions and comments are directly opposing certain communities and excluding them?
Again, let's stay fact-based. Do you know who Ambassador Rick Grinnell is?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Yes, I've heard them.
Okay. What do you know what's special about Rick Grinnell?
What?
So Rick Grinnell, a friend of mine,
Germany, right?
Germany, is Donald Trump's ambassador to Berlin. He's the highest ranking gay official, openly gay official, ever appointed by a president to the rank of ambassador. Pretty bad homophobe, right? It's like when you call Donald Trump a racist, a bigot, a man who hates Hispanics, who's an anti-Semite, who's created the lowest Hispanic unemployment in American history. A man who, after 30 years of us being lectured to by Democrats and the GOP, finally brought prison reform to America, especially for black Americans, who pardoned a black American grandmother who was in prison on drug dealing charges. The man who, for the first time in 23 years of broken promises to Israel, moved our embassy to Jerusalem and recognized Jerusalem. This is the same man that the media would have you believe is homophobic, anti-trans, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic. Guys, I implore you, if you may not like my style, the fact that I was associated with Donald Trump may mean, oh no, who is this guy? But I implore you, one message to you today. Do not be victims to propaganda and fake news. If they can take me, a person whose parents suffered under Nazi occupation as children, and get to paint me as a fascist. I had one journalist, write 42 hit pieces on me when I was in the White House. Do your due diligence, I implore you. Go to primary sources. Don't read what Slate or BuzzFeed told you. Read the president's speech from Charlottesville. Look at the figures for unemployment amongst the ethnic community. Look at who Rick Grenell is, and then make your own decision. If that's the only thing you take away from our discussion today, I will be very glad, and you will be in a healthier place when it comes to knowing what really is going on in America.
You have a radio program to do in less than an hour. If people want to follow you on social media, they can do so how?
Right, so I'm on Twitter, Seb Gorka, SEBGORKA, Sebastian_Gorka on Instagram, Facebook. The webpage is, again, Seb Gorka, SEBGORKA.com, and the show is America First.
I think it's important to understand all points of view and all perspectives. And Dr. Gorka, you have put a lot on the table. On behalf of the Washington Center, we thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you very much.